It's a pleasure to see you all, and I must say, as I always do, that my least favorite part of what I do is stop all the talking. So I'm sorry. But in the interest of starting in a timely way, which I've also learned is important, we're going to begin the program for today for the 10th annual nonprofit fall luncheon that Common Good Vermont is bringing to you. Now, Common Good has only really been in business for 8 years, so you probably say, why is it the 10th annual nonprofit luncheon? And that is because we started this at CCTV as a media maven. And I'm not sure, but maybe someone here was at that first one, or it's some of the, there we go, we got some hands, awesome. And so a lot of those topics were about the use of technology and how nonprofits can be more effective. And then as we became involved in Common Good Vermont, we felt that it's great to teach people how to tell stories effectively, but if you don't really have a good story to tell, we better get working on that. And that's what Common Good is all about, really. So today we are very fortunate to have Nan Stone with us. She is going to talk to us about the performance imperative. And I'm not going to say a lot about it because she will. But I would like to say thank you to our supporters and underwriters, including the A.D. Henderson Foundation and the Vermont Community Foundation, who are really the anchor stores of Common Good Vermont. So thank you so much for that support. And also we have, yes. And also we have support from Velco this year for the first time, the High Meadows Fund, which has been an ongoing supporter, the National Life Group Foundation, Ben & Jerry's Foundation, Fairpoint, and of course the Doubletree, where we are today, has given us some, I guess, discounts are the word, which is very kind of them, and we certainly appreciate it because this is a lovely place to have an event, and we hope you consider it for your events too. We are going to do a few announcements, and we're going to introduce Mary Ellen Jackson, who is formerly the head of the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits, who is going to talk about a very exciting launch of Nonprofit Next for Vermont, which is a project that they have had going of resources, really must-have resources for the New Hampshire community, and she's going to tell us about what's in store in Vermont. And I'm going to just say a little bit about the economic impact report, and then we will go to the performance imperative. I want to just a special thank you to the Common Good Vermont staff members. We have Kathleen Swanson, who has been our development director for years. Stand up, Kathleen. Let's see your beautiful face. Liz Ruffa, who is our anchor store on the southern part of the state and the head of special projects. Barry Silver, who is our new marketing and development leader. She's in the back. And Morgan Webster, who's here on the side, who's our new Common Good Vermont coordinator. And I'd like to just thank Megan Humphrey for helping out this morning. Thank you, Megan. Okay. There's paper on your tables. Those are called tables. And you have paper on them. And if you have ideas about events and topics you would like covered, it will help us plan the spring series. So we would love that for you to fill those out if you have some thoughts. And I also want to call your attention to the events we have coming up for the remainder of 2015, including for those of you in and near Brattleboro, the storytelling workshops that Vermont Community Foundation is hosting and we are producing. The subject is digital storytelling. We still have some seats for that. We have working board luncheons starting in Addison County on the 1st, and there will be 3 of those, and those are hour-and-a-half luncheons on topics related to governance, because as you all know, and we deeply believe, if we could actually improve board performance, we could turn the curve on nonprofit performance. So we're starting to focus our energies on the boards, and on the 14th, the luncheons start again in Chittenden County. There will be a webinar on the 28th of October on, it's a recent study that Third Sector New England produced on leadership in New England. And this has some pretty startling statistics, as many of you are living through, that there will be a huge drop-off in the and retirement of senior leadership, not only in the nonprofit sector, but in all sectors. And how do we prepare for that? And how do you, as a leader who may be transitioning, prepare for that? That would be, you would want to come to November 19th, Courage in Leaving and Active Leadership for the Transition Ahead, which will be here. And then we have another storytelling workshop in Rutland in November, on November 4th. Okay. I'd like to just thank the organizations that Nan has worked with to put together her presentation today, which includes the Addison County Transportation Resource Center, Green Mountain Farm to School, Groundworks Collaborative, Home Share Vermont, and the Cathedral Square Corporation, which initiated with partners the SASH program. And we're really very happy so many of you are here, and that you are willing to share your stories with Nan is a great blessing for us. So thank you very much for that. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Mary Ellen to come up, and she's going to talk about our exciting partnership, which launches the 1st of October. So that's soon. That's next week.
Well, good morning, or are we at afternoon? I guess we're afternoon. Hello, everyone. Hello. I have a fun opportunity now. As Lauren Glenn mentioned, I was the executive director of the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits for 10 years. Had a wonderful experience. And one project emerged during that time that got me so fascinated and opened new doors of thinking for me that about 9 months ago I told the board, this is the project I want to delve into. And at 62, I'm ready not to make a commute of an hour every day to work and be a leader in the organization. I wanted to be a project leader. So, as Lauren said, there's going to be a lot of transitions going on. So I'm going to tell you about the project that really I'm fascinated about and excited. But first I'm going to mention to you that this project and this service that we're bringing to Vermont couldn't have happened without Lauren Glenn's partnership and all the staff at Common Good Vermont and with the Vermont Community Foundation. So we built a partnership about 6 or 7 months ago with this in mind, and the next stage of the partnership is to build it with you, because this dynamic resource platform will only get better with your engagement, and so I'm really looking forward to that. So, before I describe to you a little bit about Nonprofit Next and really do a cheerlead about having you use it, I want to just share a story with you. So yesterday I got up and I had 2 priorities. And one priority is I was taking a webinar on webinars that are fantastic. The webinar that you can take to learn how to give webinars. And I needed to take that. I've sat through a number of webinars where I multitasked, and at the end I thought, what were they saying? So has anybody heard of Andy Goodman? A few people. So he's from the Goodman Center in Los Angeles, marvelous storyteller. He has written he does a lot of webinars now out of the Goodwin Center. He's a very engaging presenter, and he wrote a book called Why Bad Presentations Happen to Good Causes. Now, keep that book in mind. I'm going to go back to it and keep the fact that he has a webinar on why bad presentations happen to good causes. So yesterday I'm on my webinar, and I learned 2 things that really stuck with me, resonated with me. And what Andy said is, think of webinars not as places, opportunities to give information on a screen. So we tend to think, oh yeah, I got to learn something. I'll watch this webinar, and they'll tell me, what is what, and what is going on. Instead, think of webinars as a live radio broadcast with visuals. That really gets you thinking a bit differently. Years ago, people sat around the radio, and it was very enjoyable, and it was very engaging. So, and he gave us a lot of tricks on how to create a webinar that makes you feel like you're at a live radio broadcast. I'm not going to give you those tips, but Nonprofit Next will. The other thing I took away from him, and he said all webinars really have to engage people with questions rather than feeding people information. That learning is a very active pursuit. So you want to frame your information on a webinar on the screen, and you want to engage hopefully no more than 25 people in calling on them while you're giving the webinar. And he was describing it as there's a lot, webinars are learning experiences, and you need to pull from the wisdom of the people on the other side of the radio. So pulling wisdom out of people by making it interactive. I'm going to get back to Andy Goodman in a minute. My second big priority yesterday was driving to Vermont. Now, I live in southern Maine, so I needed to travel from southern Maine through New Hampshire into Vermont, although New Hampshire's getting to look a lot like Vermont. Bernie Sanders is popping up just about everywhere. And then I came to this beautiful city, and I was delighted to be here. But as many of you who travel know, one of the benefits is that you get to listen to a full NPR show. And the show I was listening to, I don't know if any of you heard it, it was a film, they were interviewing a filmmaker, and she's come out with this new movie called Intern. People have seen it it's got Robert De Niro in it, and Anne Hathaway, and Robert De Niro at 70 is the intern to the CEO, Anne Hathaway, in her 30s. And the screenwriter was talking a lot about the balance of how people learn and information sharing between a millennium and a septuagenarian. If I got that right, that's a person in their 70s. And De Niro had really never had a Facebook page, and so part of if you see the movie, I guess part of it is real, that he was learning as he was going. But there was a wonderful quote that she shared with the radio listeners, and again, it was a real good radio broadcast. And let me see if I can find the quote. Wisdom never gets old. So I thought that was a good one. So here we have Andy Goodman saying you got to pull the wisdom online as well as in person. As I'm driving, this person is saying, boy, wisdom never gets old. That's a great phrase. And that brings me somewhat to today, because I think of Nonprofit Next platform as a way to deliver wisdom and resources and templates and tools and videos, etc. I'll get out of your way. Just going to bring it up. In a very active format where we can share wisdom. And it's crazy. Lauren Glenn, I actually met Lauren Glenn in Washington, D.C. when we were attending a National Council of Nonprofits networking event, because there's 40 to 50 associations and such around the capacity builders around the country. And I must say to you, all of us were overly dressed, and in walked Lauren in her bright pink outfit carrying her yoga mat, and I said, that's a woman I need to meet. But on another note, it's always struck me, going to national meetings and hearing speakers and hearing what everybody else is doing and learning about resources, how crazy it is that we don't share this, how hard it is. You're going to prepare a great guest speaker today, I am sure. So, and we're all trying to share. There's all these, you can get on the internet and click nonprofit capacity building tools or resources, and you get like 35 million things in 1 minute click. That's not what I'm talking about. It's always dawned on me that us in our field, we in the nonprofit community that really want to emphasize building our capacity, haven't figured out how to streamline sharing. So in true Andy Goodman style, let me ask you a few questions as a way of exposing you to Nonprofit Next Vermont. So please raise your hands if you've ever thought, or put your head on your desk and thought, I wonder if there are a few strategies, a few tools, a fun quiz that I could give my board members so they would be less reluctant to hide from fundraising. Or Have any of you been getting ready to conduct an interview? You've got some money and you're going to hire someone. And actually, there's 100 things you can't say in an interview, but have any of you thought, boy, I wonder if I can say that in an interview? Can I ask that question? Anybody ever had that cross their mind? When I read the tool on Nonprofit Next that said all the questions you couldn't ask in an interview, I went, oh, I've been breaking the law. And how many of you ever thought, the way we evaluate our executive director, or if you're board members, or you're the executive director, or you're an employee, it's a real drain. And here it is again, that time of year, and it's going to be a gut-clenching situation. I wish I had a performance tool, evaluation tool that really worked. It was streamlined, but it was healthy, and it was good. Anybody ever had that thought? Well, these are the questions we listened to put together Nonprofit Next 5 years ago. I've run a nonprofit. I've run 4 different nonprofits, big, small, regional, and I've had so many times where I put my head down on the desk and thought, yeah, I know we need to do all these things. It's going to take me forever. I'm going to have to call 10 different people to, how did you do this? I can go on the internet, but I don't know who wrote this stuff on the internet. And a lot of what's on the internet is wonderful. It's teaching you, but it's not giving you something to go forward and act. So, as Lauren Glenn said, we are going to be sharing our Nonprofit Next platform with Vermont. It'll be Nonprofit Next Vermont. And we built it to do 3 things. There it is. Save you time, save you money, and help you build capacity. Yes, there are over a couple hundred tools, resources, templates, each on the site, but each one's been written for you to use immediately. You can go on there, as far as I'm concerned, and download everything if you want. It's Word documents, it's ready to use, it's employee handbooks, it's policies on, like conflict of loyalty. We all talk about conflict of interest, but when you really think about what is conflict of loyalty, I was talking to Diane about grant writing, and we're creating a whole new suite of resources on Nonprofit Next to have you think about, how do I assess where grant writing fits into my overall portfolio of where I get money? How do I think about grant writing? Are there some hard and fast rules? As well as templates and tools, there's annual reports, there's a lot of HR, there's board modules. So everyone in Vermont that runs a nonprofit is going to have access to Nonprofit Next at no cost for an entire year. There will be a cost in year 2, and it will be less than a cup of coffee a month. And we'll be giving a webinar and explaining all of that. But here comes the partnership. It needs to be vibrant. We need your ideas. It's a very iterative process. If we're going to save you time and money and help build your capacity, we want to know that your nonprofit board members don't quite get social media and how to leverage it for fundraising, and we'll build some tools and send them right back out to you. There's videos on Nonprofit Next. I hope there are some consultants in the room. Anybody a consultant? I hope you approach us, because it's a win-win between you and Nonprofit Next. We want your tools, your ideas. Now, we do have criteria. Nothing on Nonprofit Next is going to take 3 hours to read through. It's quick, it's immediate. And let me give you one example. A good friend of mine is Chris Grenier. She works for Citizens Bank. She serves on a lot of boards. She was heading over to a board meeting and realized, oh, now this is so typical. I was supposed to bring a document destruction policy, and I was supposed to create one, and shoot, I forgot to do it. So she literally pulled over the side of the road and said, Mary Ellen called me and said, do you have anything on Nonprofit Next? I said, yeah, when you get to your board meeting, open it up. She's sitting in the board room, and she downloads a sample policy for document destruction. And while she's on there, she goes, oh, well, we don't have an ethics policy, and we don't have this policy. And she's sitting in the board with literally rolling them out so that the board can have a conversation. Back to you consultants, you might be given a seminar or a workshop. When we give presentations all over New Hampshire, Maine, we do some in Massachusetts, tools go on Nonprofit Next prior to the presentation. They're used during the presentation. You can leave the presentation and think, I'm going to forget that. Well, if you're me, you're going to forget it. But go back to Nonprofit Next. And the future is where it's at, though. We realize it's about people. We want your board chairs to be able to click on Nonprofit Next and download a bundle. It's really overwhelming to be a new board chair. So how do I get started? Can I look at a video from somebody who's been a board chair? So we'll be coming back to Vermont. We hope to video some people, great board members. We hope to work with the business community, and we want to work with the consultants. I'm not going to take questions today because you've got a full agenda. I wanted to get you excited about Nonprofit Next. Everyone in your organization, so your board members, your staff. I had a person in New Hampshire get some bad news and have to reorganize her organization. And she just said to her staff, take the half day, get on Nonprofit Next, see if you can find some resources for us, watch a few videos. We want it to be your tool. We'll come back. It's gonna go live in Vermont next Thursday, October 1st. Following that, we want you to get in, play around with it, always send me ideas, and then we're gonna have a webinar because I'm gonna use what Andy Goodman taught me. Thank you.
Thanks again to the Vermont Community Foundation for underwriting this first year of Nonprofit Next. We're really very appreciative. Thank you for that. And we are going to launch it, and we all want to hear from you. And the reason that Common Good feels this is valuable is because our site is actually more of a blog. It's sort of more of a current resources. We don't have really a lot of depth on this evergreen kind of content. So we thought it would be a good adjunct to this site and the work that we do. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on the economic impact study except to tell you that we are making an interactive version. So let me just roll the tape back. I have to roll it back just a little bit because I feel like I know everyone here, but I don't, and I didn't introduce myself. So you may be wondering, who am I and why am I up here? So I just to clarify, I'm Lauren Glendavidian, and I am the executive director of the Center for Media and Democracy, of which Common Good Vermont is one of our major projects, along with Channel 17, Town Meeting TV, and a small production company. So just so you know. Yes, okay, thank you. So we have been venturing into the world of advocacy and on behalf of the nonprofit sector over the past couple years, especially as the continuing dialogue between the state and our sector about how few resources there are, and that conversation inevitably balances the budget on the backs of our organizations. And there are a group of us who have been trying to kind of raise the flag in addition to organizations' own advocacy work as a we've been trying to raise the flag as a sector. And so last spring we did an economic impact study for the state that shows what we knew, which is that nonprofit organizations constitute 20% of the gross state product and 20% of the workforce. So that's actually, we're a bigger sector, thanks primarily to hospitals and to educational institutions, but we are a bigger sector than pretty much any other sector in the state. We are bigger than manufacturing, we are bigger than retail. We are a formidable sector. And so we put together a quick report, we called it Fast Facts, but we recently completed an interactive version that will go live the 1st of October. And in it is not only the facts, which you can play around with, thanks to Data Doozer, this fantastic woman that we met at a data meetup. It was great, and she did this for us. But it also has the whole list of every nonprofit 501c3 in the state of Vermont. So for those of you who want to find out the nonprofits in Addison County, you can enter Addison County, or you want to find all the human services organizations, you can enter that. So you'll be able to sort that information and export it and use it. It comes from the IRS master file. So that will be continually updated. And this is a project when we started in 2008, we thought would cost $10,000 to do. And it didn't, because it's now 2015. And it's a great resource. So I just wanted to wake you up that that is coming. And of course, if you get our newsletter, you will hear all about it, at least twice. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Nan Stone. Nan Stone is a senior leader of the Bridgespan Group, which has been working in the field of nonprofit capacity for many, many years with great impact. She also is the former editor of the Harvard Business Review. And I met Nan because she is an ambassador for the Performance Imperative, which is a framework for how to be an excellent organization. And this framework was put together by a group of people led by our mutual friend Mario Marino, who I met in the early 1990s when he had just sold his business and was trying to figure out, his software business, how to spend his money on good things. And he decided that he would create a company called Venture Philanthropy Partners and invest in scaling up high-performing organizations so they could have national impact. So he is an impact investor, and I think you could safely say one of the first impact investors, maybe not, but I like to say that. And he and his colleagues across the country, including people like Nan, first put together the book Leap of Reason, which is on your tables, which is a must-have book about the importance of managing for impact. And as you know, this is a topic that has been very important to all of us for the past several years, especially with the Benchmarks for a Better Vermont project and the reintroduction of results-based accountability into our language and culture. So the performance imperative is in effect the next chapter. It's what are the pillars of performance that are necessary for us as organizations to attend to so that we can make the most of our valuable resources and have the greatest impact on the people that we serve. So Nan Stone, we welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren Glenn, and thank you for inviting me to be here.
Right
And if you can't hear me, just go like that, okay? And thank you also for helping me get started, because when I thought about if I were in your position, what I would be thinking is, what is this and why should I care? And Lauren has just done a really good job of explaining what the it is. And also on the why, you already know the answer to that or you wouldn't be here. I mean, there's just an enormous gap between the amount of needs that the organizations we all work with are aiming to serve and the resources that are available for them. So I am not going to spend time trying to persuade you of what you already know is important is important. Instead, I'm going to tell you some stories about fellow nonprofit Vermonters and what they're doing to raise the bar in their own organizations. I'm going to spend a little bit of time telling you why I think that this framework might be something that you'd find useful, even amid all of the tools and templates and what have you that are out there. And I'm going to share, if there's time, a couple of lessons learned from some other organizations that have been actually experimenting with the template in their own work. And as Lauren Glenn said, I had the real pleasure of having a series of conversations with people in Vermont about what they were doing, and she neglected two of my informants, so I want to call out Hilltop Montessori and VSA Vermont, and and you will hear about all of them. I mean, my only real regret is that I can't tell you in depth about all of them, because if I did, you would either be asleep in your plates or we would be here at breakfast tomorrow. So I'm gonna jump in, and if I say anything that provokes a question or something, scribble it down, because I'm hoping that we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, or if not, that you can stay after and we'll engage in that. So, Green Mountain Farm to School. Green Mountain started out as a volunteer activity on the part of one woman to do one farm garden in an after-school program in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont.
The next year, 5 schools wanted to have gardens, so she went to work for the school department. And a few years after that, it was sufficiently successful to become its own 501c3. And today, Green Mountain has 30+ farm-to-school sites. It's got a regional sales hub called Farm Direct that did $350,000 worth of sales for local farmers last year, and they're hoping to do $450,000 this year. And those are sales that in all likelihood would not have happened, many of them. They have a statewide campaign called Vermont Harvest of the Month, which has tips and recipes and instructional materials that go statewide, as well as some of the most amazing graphics. I've only seen them on the web, but I want to get copies and stick them in my office. So. And they've got something called the Lunchbox, which is a mobile meals program that serves kids during the summer for free lunches, and also sells at reasonable cost food for adults and provides recipes, and again gets people involved with the local food system. Now, if you asked most executive directors what the secret of all of this growth and success was, they would tell you about all the things that they did right. Well, if you ask Catherine Sims, who's the ED, who's here, which I'm delighted about, what she'll tell you is about all the things that didn't go as planned and what they learned from that. And Farm Direct is a great example. So she's working in the schools, she's working with kids, she has a great idea. We're getting them interested in vegetables and things. Let's get local food into the school cafeteria. So she thought, I'll give the director of meals a list of all the local farmers. And she did that. And you know what happened? Nothing, exactly. So then she said, okay, well, we'll do the ordering. We'll bring in fresh fruits and vegetables. And she got a lot of local apples in. And they were a great success. All the apples went. And what happened? Went right back to the commercial distributor once they were gone. So then she thought, well, okay, we'll collect and place orders with farmers once a month, and the farmers will deliver them to the schools, and everyone will see how that works. Well, the farmers didn't like making the deliveries, and it turned out that once a month, or dosage, as it's called by some people, but not me, wasn't sufficient to change anybody's habits. So that led to Green Mountain acquiring a truck, a driver, and weekly ordering, and so it's now become a regional food hub up in the Northeast Kingdom. And so you see there's a pattern there. You get a good idea, you try it, you assess it, you see how it works, you adapt, and you try it again. And that learning loop is evident in what I've learned about the way that Green Mountain runs and the way that Catherine helps people develop at the same time that she's improving the practice of the organization. So, and it's not elaborate things. It's things like informal daily check-ins. You know, how's it going? Anything that could be better? Weekly meetings between employees and supervisors that always end with a two-way check-in. You know, how are things going? What could be better? What's happening? Simple program dashboards, and plus Delta assessments by every member of the staff after an event. You know, what worked? What could have been better? Annual staff retreat that both looks back and uses the looking back to plan forward. And Green Mountain uses a bunch of AmeriCorps students every year, and they do interviews with them and listen to what they have to say. They're a great source of constructive criticism because they've been part of the organization, but they're now out of it. So candor is easy. In fact, one of the candid comments was, our meetings are boring. You could start them differently and rotate who facilitates too, which has been put into practice. So the listening to feedback, even when it may not be exactly what you want to hear, is an important piece of building a culture that can actually improve. Because if people are afraid to tell you what's wrong or what they think could be better, you're dead in the water. You can't possibly get better. So, as Catherine says, if you're tackling big problems as we are, you have to be willing to try, learn, and adapt. And that's really a culture that values learning. But People and organizations that learn go hand in hand is something that I've discovered. And another terrific example from your neck of the woods is HomeShare Vermont, which was started in 1982 as by a bunch of local retired people who were part of the Retired Seniors Volunteer Program in conjunction with folks from UVM to put together a home matching service between people who wanted to stay in their homes but perhaps couldn't be or didn't want to be or couldn't afford to be by themselves, and people who were looking for housing. And HomeShare Vermont does that matching process unbelievably well. They surveyed their participants earlier this year. They got a 77% response rate. 99% of them said that they were really satisfied with the service that they had gotten, the match that had been made. And 99% were satisfied. 97% said that they would recommend it to a relative or friend. In the business world, that's something, maybe in the nonprofit world too now, but that's called the Net Promoter Score. And it is, at Bridgespan, we would have been breaking out beer bottles if we ever had a net promoter score that was nearly as high as that. I mean, it's extraordinary. And they do it, in fact, in a very smart and very sustainable and very savvy way, because most of their frontline staff, the people who make the matches, are volunteers. They work from 5 to 10 hours a week in the organization, and they do a phenomenal job of bringing skills from their parallel or prior lives as teachers, as counselors, as social workers, into making the match. So it's both knowledge and intuition that they do. But when Kirby Dunn became the executive director in 2000, she didn't think volunteers made sense. She thought that managing them was, took an awful lot of time. It was inefficient. You were likely to have problems from a quality control perspective, and you might or might not, but probably wouldn't have the kind of professional knowledge that was needed. So she thought she would pretty quickly raise money and hire another professional to do the matches. Well, clearly that didn't happen. And it didn't happen in part because of the quality of the volunteers and their skills, but also because she realized that, like so much of the work in nonprofits that relate to all human beings, us, there's a personal element that can't always be addressed and kind of catalyzed and sparked by someone with a lot of book learning, if you will. And so the way that she manages, that the staff, small staff manages the volunteers, again, is learning to appreciate the skills. It's very clear about the commitment that's being made on both sides. There's a lot of training for the volunteers who come in, and they find ways to make things easy. So there's a little calendar that tells you when your auto insurance has to be renewed so that there's no liability. And in particular, they've made it a point of understanding the motivation that brings people to volunteer and to stay, which is the mission, of course, but also the social interaction with one another, with the staff, with the clients, and particularly with the young woman who manages them. So the other piece that I think is notable about HomeShare, and it came out in comments that Kirby made, was an appreciation that sometimes small is much more effective than very big. Matching people is a time-intensive and personal kind of program and process. And the flexibility that comes from their being small, they don't have to have a uniform model about whom will we match with this person. It's not only seniors with seniors. or younger people with seniors. It can be the right person with the right senior. And so that, again, seems to me a kind of not only a learning organization, but a learning person who's helping to create a culture that does that. The second example that I want to go into in depth, and I realize that probably was more depth on home share than I realized, or I should have had another slide for it. But I'm still learning about slides, so I definitely will need some of the nonprofit next training. The second one I want to start about is Addison County Transit Resources. And if Green Mountain had the opportunity to kind of start right from scratch, sometimes the path to high performance starts with a real low. And that was the case when Jim Moulton took over as executive director of ACTR. Because ACTR was facing what you could politely call financial distress. And what that actually meant was that they had a large budget deficit and a negative net worth. So on the principle that you start where you are, Jim started with getting everyone, the staff and the board, to understand the numbers and to be able to start making decisions about how to change not only the expenses of the organization, but also its revenues. And that piece, the kind of remembering that it's revenues as well as expenses when you're in a situation like that, is a really important thing that it can be very easy to forget when you're getting constrained by what's happening to the budget. So they engaged in a lot of good housekeeping. They put sound practices in place and built budgets with realistic costs and estimates and prepared contingency plans and monitored expenses in real time so that they could see problems when they were coming down the road, e.g., all of a sudden maintenance expenses on the buses are way higher than you expected. And understand, well, is that a one-time thing, or do we actually have 1 or 2 or 3 buses that need to be taken out of service before they run us into a huge hole at the end of the year? But also to look at positive variances. You know, what's working? Where are we seeing signs that there are things that we ought to be building on? And they were also, Jim made just as they were transparent internally about what the finances were like, he made a practice of being transparent externally with funders and with the public, which is a terrific way to build trust and to engender relationships that will then help people to take seriously when you come to them and you say, we have a problem, we need help, or we would like your support, because they know that you're going to use the resources that they're giving you responsibly. And in a story that some of my experience through Bridgespan with people dealing with the government struck me as absolutely miraculous, Jim actually talks about when expenses for helping seniors who suddenly need critical transportation facilities and can't use the buses anymore, when those start mounting up, they document the rise in expenses. They go to the state and they explain what's happening. And he said 9 times out of 10, they will get some additional funding to take care of those crisis costs. Since you can't really predict in advance when someone is going to need dialysis or break something and need to be in a wheelchair. So, but nonprofits have to be businesslike in the sense that we've got to be mindful of the bottom line. But if it's only numbers that you're looking at, you can go really quickly off track. And that's not, of course, that's not only true of nonprofits, but we'll leave that piece aside for the moment. But if that's all that you're tracking, the tendency is to do one of 2 things. You start chasing revenues that you shouldn't go after. You apply for grants that are going to really pull you away from what it is that you focus on, rightly. Or you start scrunching expenses, and in that process you can very easily put your performance and the results that you're getting at risk. So ACTR also tracks a whole bunch of other things, like overall usage of the buses, and also very specifically, where are people getting on and where are they getting off? And where would they like to be able to get on and get off? And what else would they like to see? And why are they using the buses? And how satisfied are they? And are they actually using them instead of choosing to use their own cars? And implicit in these measures, I think, is that ACTR has a much bigger mission than simply moving people from here to there. Their mission is to connect the community and to enhance the economic, the social, and the environmental well-being of the region that they serve. And they make that apparent on their website. I mean, it's quite interesting. You can enter in how much money you'll save if you don't use your car to make a 25-mile, or probably any length commute. You can also find out what your carbon footprint savings will be. And I will say that this led me to take advanced transit from Canaan, New Hampshire into Hanover twice instead of getting in my car. So, you know, there's these reaching out into New Hampshire here. But the point is that he can also use, or ACTR can also use the mission to reach out to potential private funders as well as to the state. And because there are people, you know, there will be people who care about, mostly, who care passionately, right, about the environment. There will be others who are really interested in helping their employees have a more regular way to get to work. There'll be others who are interested in building community, and all of those people can legitimately find a reason to support ACTR if they want to in the work that the organization is doing. So where is it, you know, X years on from the financial disaster? Well, the finances are very healthy. There are more than 3 times as many routes. There are almost 3 times as many buses. The number of volunteers who drive seniors is way up. And the reward is that you get to do it again. A year ago, ACTR was asked to manage Stagecoach, a transportation service, down in Orange County and Windsor County that was having some financial difficulties. So this combination of thinking about measurement, as Jim says, first we do, this is a great way to put it too, what are we trying to do, and then how will we measure and track it? But thinking about measurement and thinking about how you open out into the community is one of the things that I was really impressed by, and I've come to understand that that's a key piece of RBA, that it's not just what's my organization doing, but how is the community overall improving because of the work that we do. And just a quick mini example of that, but Hilltop Montessori School, which for many years was, well, it started as a parent-run kind of co-op with a parent as the head, people who believed in Montessori education. Started quite young, is built up over time. But for a long time, they rented facilities. And then they got a notice that they were going to have to be out of the school space that they rented in 18 months. And that really led to a process of becoming a kind of institution, if you will, because they bought land, they built buildings, and so on. And as part of that, one of the things that they have been going through is transitioning the board from a kind of hands-on, all-in, where the board does the management, into a more strategic board, and that has been able to say, you know, look at what is success and start to say, well, it's more than just can we fill the seats in the school. It's also about the diversity of the students in that school, economically, racially, about the balance in kids, about the amount of scholarship help you can give, and also about becoming part of the community and taking real steps to do that. So when we invite people in, you know, setting up ways to invite people in, and really also becoming advocates. And personally, I think this is incredibly important given some of the pressures in schools these days and in school reform, but of getting people to understand the Montessori method and that education as we've just been hearing, and in a variety of ways, is a lot more than how you do on standardized testing. And so that's another example. I'm going to need to go a little more quickly or I'll run out of time. So we talked briefly about SASH, which is my third kind of in-depth example, and it really, I chose to talk about SASH here because it shows what can happen when the board of an established organization that's doing a good job brings in a new leader with some innovative ideas, and together they decide that they can do better. And the organization in this case was Cathedral Square, the affordable housing nonprofit that's based here in Burlington. And the leader was Nancy Edridge, who agreed that she would become the ED if the board would support her in trying to mesh where people lived with the state of their health, with health described in a very broad way, as you can see from one of the pictures on their website with guys making music, but the sense of community, of ending isolation for seniors and for people with disabilities. And SASH has grown since its inception into a very, I think, successful collaborative program between SASH staff, which is fairly minimal, and local nonprofit organizations, healthcare, hospitals, VNA, mental health workers, social workers. They have almost 5,000 participants in 118 sites, and they've become a Medicare demonstration project with considerable funding from Medicare, which also means that they're undergoing rigorous evaluation. And they have so far, they're in the second year of it, they've so far proven that they can reduce costs, they can increase access to care for the most vulnerable and the poorest, and they can increase quality of life for the participants. But of course, that wasn't where it started. It started with one site where they talked to the residents, and the residents became active members, in a sense, of the design team. They also talked with other housing and health organizations across the state to make sure that they were seeing the same sorts of problems that Cathedral Square was. And as they got more and more affirmation that yes, the problems were real, and yes, people were interested in what was happening, and yes, there were things they could do, they aligned all of that with some pretty critical design features or design principles for their model. And the headline really was, "Don't reinvent the wheel." And I see that they applied that in three ways. One was that they did turn to proven practices. There's an enormous amount of expert knowledge out there about the social determinants of health and of premature death, about programs that work, about programs that don't. And so part of the design of the program was, let's bring evidence-based practices into our program. They knit together local assets. They did not go out and say, SASH needs to have all of these capacities on staff, and we're going to be all over the state and do everything. They started creating a network of local providers and providing ways for local organizations to enter into what seemed like a continually getting bigger and bigger healthcare system. And they thought both lean and sustainable as they were thinking. The lean was that they didn't try to do it all of themselves, and they started out thinking statewide. Not, I think, because they were particularly interested in empire building, but some of you may know, I don't think so. That isn't the sense that I get at all. But because they needed a lot of participants, and they needed funding, and in order to do that, they needed data. I mean, you can't prove to Medicare that you can reduce costs with your program if you have 25 people in your program. You need big numbers. And so that was to inform their work and program, and to see the impact to help people see the impact in a persuasive way. They use data to bring in participants, local participants, and also to bring in kind of the active cooperation of the front line. Sorry, there's a bug that is more interested in me than I am in it. Fundamentally, one of the things that had to happen with their frontline workers was that they had to switch from thinking of themselves as case managers to thinking of themselves as educators. Because a big piece of the program was to help people manage their care themselves. And to support them in doing that, but to give them ways to improve their own health. And that means that there's got to be a lot of trust also between the person delivering the support and the participant receiving the support. And for that, you need to help people understand, well, then why do I have to ask somebody why they're depressed? Or if they're depressed? That's a pretty sensitive question. You know, why would you want to do that? Well, because if you know that a bunch of people in a particular housing site are depressed, then you want to look for programs that can help them deal with depression. And they may not be there. You know, you may be offering programs that have nothing to do with the needs of the people that you serve. And so having this way, so tying what you're asking for and actually thinking before you ask about what would, if we knew the answer to this, or if we had this piece of data, what would it tell us? What would it help us do? Was one of the things that they have done incredibly well. And they think about, obviously, the same kind of thing for funders. They recognize that it's two separate kinds of data. Funders are interested in cost savings, and frontline workers are interested in the well-being and confidence of the people that they serve. So, okay, you don't have to be, so this model had to utilize every bit of existing assets and be tightly integrated with existing systems. That's a very smart way to think. But you actually don't have to be as big as Cathedral Square to think that way. I'm going to talk about one of the smallest organizations that I interviewed, maybe the smallest in terms of staff and budget, I'm not sure. But that's VSA Vermont, which uses the magic of arts to engage the capabilities and build the confidence of people, children and adults with disabilities. And when Judith Chalmers started as the ED there 10 years ago, she asked the staff, you know, how's it going? And they said, well, you know, in really big centers, it's where the staff already knows about inclusionary programming and stuff, it's not going all that well. Where we seem to be having success is in very small, isolated, rural home care sites with only a couple of kids. And so we think that's an opportunity, but we definitely need more training and how to work. So Judith, in an act of courageous leadership, we're going to keep coming, you'll see we come back to courageous leadership, because I hope that's coming through in all of these stories, went to their funders and said, we'd like to change our focus. We want to focus on small sites with 4 to 6 kids, and we want to work with 36 providers that are all over the state of Vermont. And the funder said, okay. And they had a 12-week program. At the end of it, they could see that the changes for the kids were terrific. They went back 2 years later, and it hadn't stuck with the providers. So you start to realize that you've got to work within, I mean, there is a system for childcare. And it's not just today's child, it's tomorrow's child, and the child 5 years from now. So they went back to their funders again, and they said, we see that there's a problem. We need to do we need to extend the program, we need to do more coaching, we need to do more assessing in real time of the providers, and more training. And they did that. But then they also think of VSA and its work as part of a larger system, which is helping the providers do better and get more reimbursements. And as many of you may know, that often depends on your QRIS rating, which is Quality of Results Improvement Survey or something like that. Someone will know and correct me later. But But they kept assessing. They went back 3 years later and did a qualitative evaluation and found that people were using the skills and that the kids were doing better. And so meanwhile, they were also engaging in statewide work, which led to discovering new needs, that there was an emerging understanding that you had to engage families if you really want to bring these kids into the community and develop their confidence. And so they've just started a new program where they'll work with providers that they have already trained to help design a program for engaging families. And interestingly, what they're using facilitative leadership training as part of that training, which will be able to be used by the providers in all sorts of other contexts, not just in thinking about including kids in arts programs. So it's a very generative approach, and one that can help change systems statewide. Okay, so you have probably noticed, thank you, my 10-minute warning. You've probably noticed that that all of these stories and examples begin with leadership. And I'm gonna, if needs be, I'm gonna cut the back end of this discussion, which is about lessons from out there, to give you one more lesson from here. Because this is about Groundworks Collaborative, which is the newest organization in the room, I suspect, because it came into being in July of this year. But it's actually got a long history, because it was the merger of the Morningside Shelter and the Drop-In Center of Brattleboro. Morningside is the only residential center in southeastern Vermont. I got the direction right, okay. Southeastern Vermont. And this was a merger that had been contemplated in a number of times in the past. And each time, after one discussion, it had just, gone absolutely nowhere. And there were reasons for that. The two organizations had different approaches to the problem. One was residential, designed to work with people and to get them into permanent housing. The other was a drop-in center and a resource center. They worked with different clientele. In order to get into Morningside, you had to be clean and sober. The drop-in center would take anyone who came along. They had different staff. Morningside had professionals who were working with the clients. The drop-in center, many of the staff were or had been homeless themselves. Well, this time, the discussions didn't blow up. Why? Well, the answer, even though it took a long time, but it was the leadership of Josh Davis and Lucy Fortier, who were the EDs of the two organizations, and who were able to help their boards move through the process of understanding, by creating a vision with members of the board, of what they could do together, of what the creation of a continuum of care would actually achieve, and the benefit that it could provide, not only for the clients they served, but also for the organizations themselves. So, as I said, it was a long process. I won't take you through it all. I'll cut to the quick. So, if what we've seen here is that virtually all of these organizations have hit, I really could have probably taken any organization in any pillar and helped you see the way that something was happening along one or the other of them. So if the first answer is it all begins with leadership, which is the oldest management answer in the book, but is true nonetheless. And if there's actually nothing new in these pillars. There's nothing surprising. They're the nuts and bolts of effective management. And in fact, this Mandela thing was designed, the pillars were designed so that they would be compatible with things like results-based accountability and management by objective and the other kinds of tools and approaches that people use in good management. So why do I think, nonetheless, that it can be useful? Well, one thing is that it's always good to have a roadmap, and it's especially good to have a roadmap that makes the destination clear. And in this case, the destination is that definition of high performance. It's that it's measurable, meaningful, measurable, and sustainable results, and the ability to deliver them over time for the people and causes that you serve. It can be very easy when you're making essential resource acquisition and allocation decisions. All of the decisions that are around there, including do you take the time to check in with staff? That's a resource allocation decision. But it can be very easy for the internal to come up to the foreground, particularly as an organization succeeds and grows. And that, again, is not a nonprofit only failing. There are so many businesses that get wrapped up in what they're doing and lose sight of what they should be doing. But high performance, I mean, you know this, it's not how big your budget is. It's not how sophisticated your people management system is. It's not how fancy your technology is. It's results. And you can't do that over time without having the capacity to do it and sustain it. Making the kinds of changes that your organizations and the organizations I've worked for are trying to make is not a let's get the kids all together and have a one-time rally. It's really long. It's a journey. It's not a point of arrival, and it's about getting better all of the time because we know we can always do better. And if you want the lessons learned, you'll have to hang around after this is over because I'm now out of time. I can, okay. Well, all right, I won't give you, there's stories attached to them, of course, so you'll get the stories later if you say, but I was trying to boil it down and think what folks who have used this template. One is start where you are and don't try to do everything all at once. Take a hard look at what you're really accomplishing. That can be really scary. But I know a number of stories, which I'll be happy to share later, but of organizations that did that, discovered that they actually were not doing a good job at all on what they were trying to do. In fact, at times they were doing actual harm. And because they knew, it's the point, facts are your friends, because they knew they could change what they were doing. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Start with the data that you have, start with what you know, ask how do we know it, see, is there more we could know, what would we do with it, but don't, it doesn't have to be perfect to start. And remember that high performance is a journey. It's not a point of arrival. Because I don't know a single organization that if you took all of these pillars and bored down on them in the excruciating detail that's in your booklet, which I do not recommend doing, you wouldn't find anybody who measured up and got it all right. But you'd find lots of people making changes where they can and as they can and in an order that always keeps the results they're trying to get in the foreground.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Oops. Great.
So we have some time for questions. If anyone that would like to ask questions, and also there's some of the folks who have been profiled are willing to stay after at 1:30 if anybody wants to talk in more detail with any of them about the work that they're doing. So that's also available. But do we have any questions for Nan? Thank you so much. That was a lot of penetrating work, and I really appreciate that you took the time to talk with all of those organizations and provide a summary. Is there more that people are interested in hearing about the framework itself, or particular questions about what was learned by these organizations? And some of them are here, so they could answer too. Yes, here, I have the mic, so I'll just bring it to you.
I'm interested in pillar number 7 in terms of your external evaluation for mission effectiveness, and how often you recommend that be done, and in what capacity is it external?
That's a terrific question. And this was actually the pillar that aroused the most controversy among these 60 people or so who put it together. There were a couple of people who wrote it all up, and then the rest of us got to kibitz and critique and discuss. And I was in the I was in the skeptic camp, let's put it that way. I think that if you're trying to scale something with federal government money and get it all over the country and so on, you do need a professional external evaluation. I mean, we have to have, as citizens, we have to have some reason to believe that investing in that program is going to work beyond the senator who wants to get a line item allocation for it. But I think that the first thing is that nobody should rush into an external evaluation before they've really looked at their organization and what they're doing and the results that they're getting themselves. And I think that it's dangerous, among other things, as well as being a waste of your time and resources, and I mean, it's silly. There are interesting ways to think about how to represent an external evaluation that would not, and here I'm going to diverge. We agree as ambassadors that we agree in principle with all of the framework, but not necessarily every detail. If you have, let me take ACTR. If you have increasing usage of your system, and you have people who are choosing to use the bus instead of using their cars, and you can document that, that's a kind of external evaluation. Your customers are evaluating you every day if you have customers. Now, in lots of instances, you don't have customers, right? It's someone else who's paying, and your customer, your client, is benefiting from that. You can ask them questions like, you can talk to them, you can listen to them. I mean, and you can start to ask them, what difference does it make that we're doing things? That's an external evaluation. There's also, I had one of the people I had the privilege of knowing and working with for many years was Brian O'Connell, who was the real driving force behind the creation of independent sector. And Brian used to say, and this was before the, sort of measurement and evaluation sort of blew up into a really big thing. But he used to say, if you go into a community and you ask people who are the best performing organizations here, you'll be surprised how often you start hearing the same name or names. It's like looking for a doctor. You ask a whole bunch of people, who do you think is a really good cardiologist? And then the person whose name keeps coming up, that's an external evaluation. So it's, this is a particularly tricky and challenging and I think troubling issue, because more and more funders are asking for proof of results, by which they often they don't know what they mean. I mean, I sit on a community foundation board where some of my fellow board members saying, we can only fund organizations with proven results. They have no idea what they're talking about. But they've heard it, and the impetus underneath it about we want to fund organizations that are delivering real results. That probably wouldn't have happened without that organization being there. But we don't actually need a randomized controlled trial to prove that. I mean, there's got to be, the room for common sense in all of this is there's a lot of room. And that gets squeezed out. There are people and voices and organizations and some funders that are pushing against that are saying, simple program evaluation isn't enough, and RCTs aren't the all and end all, and but it is hard, and of course, one of the other complications is that many of the funders who ask for results also don't want to pay for them. And that's, that's really the piece about the organizational capacity that supports high performance, because you need the money, you need money to do these things.
Hold on. Thank you.
I talk really loud. But, actually, I was looking at number 7 and was thinking of it more in terms of if you set your mission and say, this is what I do, sometimes only from an external perspective can you see if that's effective. Whereas internally you might say, well, this is our mission, but you become sort of locked into your own sort of universe. So I'm agreeing with what you're saying, but my sense of that number 7 was kind of being able to get an external perspective to kind of verify if you aren't in your own little echo chamber sometimes. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
It does.
Yeah.
I
That's
mean,
how I had
think
interpreted it.
You can. It's why sort of sitting down and saying, as a leadership team or as a staff, or as a board and executive director, what are we trying to do? What really, in some ways, it's as simple and as complicated as saying, what do we mean by success? Why do we think that what we're doing is going to lead to that? And how would we know if it is? That's, it's continually lifting it up.
I'm running over with the mic. Hey, I'm so glad to help you with this.
Hi, Curtis Osler from Resource. Tough question to answer because I'm sure it's different for every organization, but do you have a kind of a ratio, or what? Data is so important, I understand that, but then if we spend all of our time collecting data, we're not getting our programs done. It's time and money, as the pillar 4 is financial health and sustainability. How do we determine how much is the best amount of time to spend on gathering the data as opposed to actually running the programs? Any thoughts? I know it's a really general question.
I guess from your question, I'm going to presume, but tell me if it's wrong, that you're thinking about people who are actually doing the work also collecting data or information, or
depending on how many staff members are doing the work and how many are actually quantifying it.
I don't think that there's a rule of thumb. I mean, I think that in terms of people beginning to collect data and pay attention to it, that the trick is, are you able to help them see why using that data will help them do a better job? And there are, here, truth in advertising, I am so far from being either a data, someone who easily works with data, or an information technology guru. But my understanding is there are a lot of programs and things that can make entry and stuff like that a whole lot easier than it used to be. So there's that. But I think that it's a piece of, start small. Identify the few things that if you knew them could really help you think about the design of your program and whether it's working, or whether your organization overall is making strides. It doesn't, the danger is actually that people collect too much data and then don't know what to do with it. And so, if you find yourself in the situation where you've got all of this stuff and you have no idea what to make of it or do with it, I wouldn't go and hire a data analyst. I'd step back and say, wait a minute, whiteboard, what do we actually need to know? So I don't know that that's an answer, but when you're talking about bringing people in to analyze the data and to assess it for you and to really dive down into it, that again is a case of funding. And I think you have to, that's also a management decision. If we really dive into this data, do we think we can get better results at the end of it or not? And you know, those are the kinds of trade-offs that we live with when we're managing or leading an organization. So that probably was not a helpful answer.
Marie, I just want to take this opportunity just to remind you that at your place, you have this deepish dive on the performance imperative framework. So we haven't spent a lot of time talking about each one of these. We've illustrated them, but because I'm just thinking of the evaluations of this workshop and somebody saying, but you never really explained exactly what the performance imperative was. So we really illustrated them. It's because someone is going to say that. I know they will. Because I see, so all I'm saying is I'm just taking this moment to just let you know it's here. Thank you.
Can I try to head off that for a minute and just hold the question for a second? Okay, so it is a framework. I like the high-level framework. When you open that booklet and you look at all of the stuff, one of the things that you'll see, and I don't know if I haven't seen the booklet before, so I've only seen printout versions from the Leap of Reason ambassadors. So I don't know if it says this, but there was a mental model in the minds of most of the people who put this thing together. And it was very large, human services organizations with budgets of at least $3 million or above. And the part of how we got into my coming to Vermont for examples was that when Lauren Glenn said, well, you know, case studies always make it interesting, the cases that I know from the work that I've done and what I've heard are very large organizations with funders who believe deeply in capacity building and in results, and who are prepared to fund them in getting analysts and systems and working with them and what have you. And I personally, when I think about the work that I do in my private life as a citizen and a volunteer, I don't find those examples very useful. And so what I wanted to see, in a sense, I mean, you guys are my guinea pigs, okay? I wanted to see whether it was possible to make this framework be something that would be relevant for nonprofits at very different stages in their life cycle, in the size of their budgets, in the work that they're doing. And that was really the examples that I chose. I was trying to indicate that I think that it can work. But you know, you'll let me know. But that's my interest is in things that can help organizations before they get to that kind of mega liftoff, if you will. In part because most don't, but in part because I think that many shouldn't. You know, the texture of a community is built by a whole lot of organizations and people and things happening. And so from my perspective, small often is beautiful.
Well, that sort of leads to my comment or my question. I mean, a lot of the organizations, even in this room, have, you know, full-time staff or year-round staff, and their budgets are in the tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Whereas I work at a very small organization that has no full-time staff and a small board. And part of what would help me is to know sort of these are all very good things, but kind of what skills and how do you get the training to get into some of these things. I find that in looking through that, I feel very fortunate because the staff that I've amassed, we've sort of done some of these things sort of accidentally. It's not because we started out with that mission, we've kind of backed into it. But it's a little overwhelming to think about all the things that you need to have there. And having templates for small organizations that help them either stay small, because that's where their mission is very small, or to help them transition and grow to be more sustainable or more exciting. I don't know what for regular small businesses, I think there's an incredible statistic about how many go out of business in the first 5 years or 3 years. I'm wondering if it's the same thing for nonprofits. How long do nonprofits stay around? And what they need to make that step to become sustainable and to become really, growing and really a force and really having an impact on the community.
That's a great last question. Thank you, Marie.
Yeah, it's a huge question, and I'm
You have
you guys are tough. I think that let me back up. A lot of nonprofits get started because somebody has a good idea, and usually they're very passionate about whatever it is that they have the good idea about. So the phenomenon that this gentleman was talking about of getting enclosed in your own little bubble is easy, and that's where I think the stepping back, the discipline of stepping back and saying, what really are we trying to achieve? Why are we doing this? And sometimes that involves looking around and seeing that actually there are a couple of other organizations that are doing the same thing that you are. And thinking about, there are probably more nonprofit organizations in total than are quite needed, whereas some of them coming together doing the same thing could be very effective. So one thing is, step back and be conscious of what's around you. I think then that discipline of returning to it and then in some sense looking at what's the most immediate need. I mean, you can't build an organization that does everything. Having a good set of advisors. I mean, again, most very small nonprofits have boards that are friends and family. Are there skills that you should try to get onto your board? And that, by the way, is another form of external evaluation, is do people want to join your board or not? And again, so you start where you are, and then you must have some source of funding. What is it? How sustainable is it? Are there other things you could get? But it does always come back to, what are we doing to get the results? And one of my favorite questions early on, at Bridgespan we developed something called intended impact theory of change. It was really, what's success and what do you think? How do you think you're getting it? But one of the questions that we would use with people as we were pushing them about, to get to a definition of success is, what would put you out of business? What would make it so that you could happily say, we're ready to close up shop. We achieved what we did. And that, I think, is a really good and useful kind of way of getting serious about what are you trying to achieve. But I want to achieve finishing on time, so.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nan Stone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you'd like to stay after and talk with some of the organizations that were profiled today, you are welcome to do so. We're going to have a little after time, sort of 1:35, 1:40 till maybe 2:15, so feel free to stay. And in the meantime, we hope you'll come to more Common Good events. We look forward to your feedback through the external evaluation of your little surveys that we'll be sending out this afternoon, and we'll send out the links to the video early next week. So thanks so much for coming.